Good morning, everyone. Just a moment while we let everyone coming in connect to their audio before we begin. All right. Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council's weekly online briefing for faith leaders. Today's topic focuses on guidance for faith leaders for counseling their congregants on the COVID-19 vaccines. Today's event is hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the Joint Information Center of the San Francisco COVID Command Center. Some housekeeping for today. Audio, video, and chat will be monitored and recorded for record keeping, training, and quality assurance. By default, all participants will be muted and video turned off to minimize distractions. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. They will be shared with the speakers and panelists after the meeting for response. Thank you. We are in this together. We can only reopen safely as long as we all stay vigilant and wear face coverings, practice physical distancing, and avoid indoor gatherings with members of other households. Go to sf.gov/reopening for more information. Everyone eligible for the vaccine living in the following zip codes listed here can drop into Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital for their vaccinations until March 15th, 2021. No appointment is needed. There are no insurance requirements either. No one will be turned away for lack of proof, residence, age, or occupation. And now, at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to our wonderful team at the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team. Without you all and this wonderful platform, it would be impossible to do what we're doing. My name is Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. With rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine well underway, the general public is seeking to make informed decisions regarding this critical element in our national response to the pandemic. As trusted messengers, faith leaders play an important role in helping to guide those under their spiritual care. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team, welcomes a diverse group of UCSF physicians who will provide religious and lay leaders with the science-based resources needed to convey, in a non-judgmental way, to those who might be skeptical or fearful, facts regarding the vaccines being offered. At this time, it is my privilege to welcome the San Francisco Interfaith Council's Chairman of the Board, Kaushik Roy.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaushik, and on behalf of the board, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to this morning's conversation, another very salient one, given what's going on in the world. I think every one of our faith traditions, or just about, have some version of the idea that you can take away anything from a person, but whatever you do, you should not take away their hope, because their hope may be all they have. And I think many points during the pandemic, certainly in our darkest moments, that would describe a lot of us who were holding on to hope, but not really sure what was coming and when things would get better. And I dare say, over the last couple of weeks, it certainly does feel like there are some promising signs. And in fact, if I heard this correctly on the news the other night, I believe the number of folks who are fully vaccinated will or has already surpassed the number of COVID cases in the country. I'm sure one of the doctors will correct me if I'm incorrect on that, but that's what I had heard. And so we also know we have a long way to go. And we also know that there are very legitimate reasons for people in our country to have skepticism about getting the vaccines. And so I just want to give a special appreciation to Drs. Fernandez and Butler and all of our guest speakers for taking the time to join us. We are very grateful. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our amazing two-person staff of Michael Pappas and Cynthia Zambucas. Those of you who join us on a regular basis know that I am convinced that they accomplish much more than staffs much bigger than they are. And not only the board, but the entire community is grateful. So thank you, Michael and Cynthia. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I hope this will not be your last time joining us. There is an interfaith statement we like to read at the beginning of every interfaith gathering or meeting. It's just a way for us to ground ourselves and remind ourselves what brings us all together. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer from the perspective of our tradition, it should be offered according to the tradition that we identify with. If we're invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you, Kaushik, and thank you for your continued leadership and commitment to being a part of this program. Your presence enriches the program, and we are all grateful to you. In our interfaith world, one of the most beautiful things that we get a chance to do is to see the image and likeness of God in the other. The person that we have asked to offer the reflective moment and opening prayer this morning is someone who makes that very easy. Iftikhar Hai. He is a dear friend, but also a founding member and former board member of the Interfaith Council, as well as the founder and president of United Muslims of America Interfaith Alliance. Dear Iftikhar, we invite you now to ground us in that reflective moment.
Thank you very much, Michael. And again, thank you very much, Kaushik Rai. I mean, you people have been an inspiration to the whole San Francisco Bay Area community. Wherever I travel doing work, San Francisco Interfaith Council name comes up, every now and then. So thank you very much for the wonderful job that you've been doing. And here I begin with a prayer of interfaith nature. We are living in a time of great doubts about coronavirus. Some people think that this is a curse. Some people think that this is a crisis where people of faith can get together and help each other out. This is my prayer. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Our Lord, you are rich in mercy for people of all faiths who call on you for help and spiritual guidance. Guide humankind to enduring wisdom. Listen to our prayer. Receive our repentance for our sins. Bring an end to this infectious disease, this new pandemic, just as you averted the punishment of your people in the times gone by. Our Lord, you are the physician of our souls and bodies. Grant health to those who are seized by this illness, raising them from their beds of suffering, so that they might glorify you. O merciful Savior, preserve in health those who have not been infected. By your grace, O Lord, bless, strengthen, and persevere all those who out of love and sacrifice care for the sick, either in their homes or in the hospitals. Remove all sickness and suffering from your people and teach us to value the life and health as gifts from you. And give us your peace, O Lord, and fill our hearts with unflinching faith in your protection, hope in your help, and love for you and our neighbor. O merciful Lord, be with those who have died from coronavirus. May they rest in peace, and be with the families of those who are sick as they worry and grieve. Defend them from illness and despair. May they know your peace. O Lord, be with the leaders of all nations. Give them the foresight to act with charity and true concern for the well-being of the people they are meant to serve. Give them the wisdom to choose long-term solutions that will help prepare for or prevent future outbreaks. May they know your peace as they work together to achieve it on earth. Oh God, we are troubled by this scourge that is infecting your people and around the world. As traces of this pestilence are being studied in labs, we shiver at its destructive effects, especially on the frail and the elderly. Our hearts are open to you, O merciful and compassionate Lord. We come to you as children, meek and lowly. We beg you to help the doctors who work to find a cure. We beg you to help our leaders to put away childish things, to forget political advantage, and to be good towards stewards of their people. We beg you to help us to be wise ourselves and to care for our human life in the least of those around us. We cry out to you, O Lord, as one who only heals and redeems. You did not send this, but we know you can destroy it. So, our Lord, stop this pestilence and heal your people, the humanity of this earth. Cleanse us and strengthen us towards you. We are weak, but you are strong, and in our weakness, your strength is revealed. Help us, we beg you. Amen.
And thank you, dear Iftikhar, and bless you. I'd like to pick up on something that Kaushik said, because as he was speaking, my heart smiled inside when he spoke about hope and how we should not take hope away from one another. My grandfather, who came to this country, a very wealthy man, lost a lot of it during the Depression. And so he became a great advocate of education. And at one point, I was working for him in his restaurant. And I said to him, Grandfather, I want to be just like you. I want to own a restaurant. And he said to me, he goes, I want you to get an education because education is the only thing people cannot take away from you. Today, we are going to get educated. And that education, once we get it, we own it. And it will help us to make informed decisions. We are grateful to God and to scientists and physicians and accompanying healthcare workers for these vaccines. But these vaccines are of absolute no utility unless people get vaccinated. And so today, education is paramount. We are very grateful for our two presenters, Dr. Alicia Fernandez, who is the professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and general internist at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital and Trauma Center. And somebody who is no stranger to the San Francisco Interfaith Council, but is also a doctor of both the body and the soul. Dr. Jonathan Butler is the assistant professional researcher for family community medicine at UCSF. He is also the associate pastor of Third Baptist Church, and he is also the executive director of the San Francisco African American Faith-Based Coalition. So we call him Reverend Dr. Butler. We are thrilled to have you both with us today. Educate us. Dr. Fernandez?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, certainly for that warm greeting. And it's so, I'm so happy to be back, a part of the interfaith group once more. And Kaushik, thank you for those warm words as well. As you all know, I am aware of many hats, but my most important hat is really a minister. And I serve alongside Reverend Amos C. Brown. I have the privilege of sitting, having a front row seat to a lot of his wisdom. And one of the things that he often references is that of a gentleman by the name of Sweet Daddy Grace. And he always talks about how we should tangibilitate the gospel. tangibility. And we know that to not be a real word. And I think Reverend Brown has confessed that as well, but it has meaning. Tangibility is making something real, perceptible, understandable, touchable, obtainable. And as Michael has alluded, we are here to educate, but we're also here to see how we can tangibilitate, put what we know into action. Since this pandemic, it's been extremely important for us to educate our extremely diverse communities across faiths, across race, ethnicities. And we've had a lot of people who have experienced oppression and discrimination. And it's not surprising that they are somewhat skeptical of authorities and may be prone to misinformation campaigns and conspiracy theories. For some religions, and I could almost say for many religions, leaders see the vaccine not as important, not only important for individual health, but as a moral imperative to be mindful of the needs of others. And so we have a religious duty, an obligation to be vaccinated as long as competent science and medical authorities approve the vaccine. And as faith leaders, we should all lead by example. Modeling is the best message, is what my professors once told me. And I think this is our opportunity. So I'm so happy to work alongside with a colleague and a mentor, Alicia Fernandez. We are modeling how faith and science can meet. She's the expert. She'll be providing us with the information. And at the end, we'll answer your questions. But we want to ultimately reach the goal of tangibility, making sure that we are able to put what we know into practice and ensuring that folks who would like to get vaccinated be vaccinated. And we as faith leaders are those that can lead by example. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague and mentor, Dr. Alicia Fernandez.
Thank you so much, Jonathan Butler, and thank you, Michael Pappas, for that very warm welcome. And thank you for that extremely moving prayer. I know how I found it very moving. And as a physician, as someone who's been in practice for a long time, I know that the health of the soul and the health of the body go together. So I thank you for your words, and I'm deeply appreciative of this opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides, as that will make it easier to go through our talk together, our time together. So here we go. Apologies. So here is my email for those who need it. So I'm going to just launch right in. And this is the same, I'm giving the same conversation with you that we've been having with many, many people, over 30,000 people. A group of us have been working to educate people in our communities about the vaccines. So you'll see that the language and the slides, I hope, are very understandable to all. As you know, 3 vaccines have been approved. 2 of them are very similar, and 1 is a little different. And all of them are highly effective in preventing hospitalization and death from COVID-19. You probably also know that with the first 2 vaccines, it's a 2-shot process. For the Pfizer vaccine, which was approved first, there's 1 shot. People wait 21 days, they get the 2nd shot. For the Moderna vaccine, you wait 28 days, and then you get the 2nd shot. And it's important to note that these vaccines tend to be distributed in slightly different places because the Pfizer vaccine needs very deep cold storage of a sort that's only available near major hospitals, whereas a Moderna vaccine can function at regular refrigeration. How do these 2 so-called mRNA vaccines work? Very simply, we have here the coronavirus named for the beautiful spikes that form the corona were similar to the corona of the sun. Inside the virus is its own genetic material, its RNA. What the scientists have done is that they've taken a little bit of that genetic material, just a teeny part, and that constitutes the mRNA vaccine, the genetic material inside a little drop of oil, a little drop of fat. So what happens? As we inject into the arm, it enters the human muscle cell. And that little genetic material starts working in the muscle cell and starts producing these spikes. These spikes then travel to the outside of the muscle cell, and in that way teach the body to recognize the coronavirus spikes. What I always say when saying this is that understanding this is important because it explains why the vaccine cannot give you coronavirus. The vaccine doesn't contain the coronavirus. It just contains a little bit of the genetic material. It's also important to note that this little part of the genetic material never enters the room, the nucleus of the cell where the human genetic material is. And so the vaccine cannot affect our own genetic material. Well, how well do these vaccines work? I'm showing you data here from the Pfizer trial. 21,700 people got the vaccine and 21,700 people got a fake vaccine, as we call the placebo. It was just a little bit of salt water. People were followed out, and among those who got the vaccine, there were 8 cases. Among those who got the fake vaccine, the placebo, there were 162 cases. If the vaccine hadn't worked, the numbers would have been the same, roughly the same. So this turns out to be an efficacy of 95%. So how well do these vaccines work? They work incredibly well. And the data from the Moderna trial is very similar. Well, what about side effects? With the first shot, people can often complain of soreness in the arm and perhaps some redness at the injection site. But after the body has been taught with the first shot to recognize the coronavirus, it will react with the second shot. And in those cases, about half the people complained of fatigue, tiredness, headaches, and about 11% of the people had actually a fever. Those symptoms can last for a day or even 2 days. For most people, the symptoms, 70% of people, the symptoms did not interfere with their daily activities. But about 30% in the trials felt that they didn't feel well enough to go to work the next day. As you also know, there have been severe allergic reactions reported with these vaccines. And we now have an estimate of how often those occur. And it's between 4 to 5 people get those severe allergic reactions out of 1 million people vaccinated. So again, if you vaccinate 1 million people, between 4 to 5 people will have the severe allergic reactions. And almost all of those are people who've had severe allergic reactions in the past. Let's turn now to the newest member of this armamentarium, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. As you may know, it is a one-shot only vaccine, which is a huge difference. And it can be stored in regular refrigeration. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine also uses a well-established mechanism, but it's different. They take an inactivated adenovirus. What does that mean? Adenoviruses are cold viruses, and they have taken one that has been inactivated, cannot replicate. So here we have the coronavirus again, and then here is the cold virus, the adenovirus, and this little part, again, the same part of the messenger of the genetic material is in the cold virus. It enters the cell, and it too then starts making these spikes. And in that way, at the end product is the same. The human cell has made these spikes, and in that way has been taught to recognize the virus. Again, important for me to underscore that the vaccine cannot give you a cold either. This is an inactivated cold virus. What about safety with the J&J vaccine? Well, there were 43,000 participants in 8 countries. And many of those countries, including South Africa and Brazil and the UK, have currently very dangerous variants. The short-term side effects were similar to the mRNA vaccines, headache, fatigue, and fever in roughly the same amounts. And in the trial, a few severe allergic reactions were also reported. How well does it work? In the US population, the vaccine had 72% efficacy in preventing moderate to severe cases. In preventing severe cases, it had over 86% efficacy. And in preventing death, it had what is being quoted as 100% efficacy, but is probably in the high 90s. In those who are 60 years of age and had comorbidities, the efficacy was somewhat lower. And it was tested more recently, however, so it includes protections against the new variant. Many of you will be thinking, okay, if I can choose which vaccine is right for me. And what I want to underscore here is that it is impossible to compare isolated numbers because these were different populations who were tested at different times and when different variants were circulating. And we already know that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine also work against these new variants, but they also have lower efficacy. They work less well against the South African and other variants. As public health people, we tend to use a slogan, any vaccine is best. The vaccine you get is the best one. But of course, there are people who will want to know, and it is important to understand that logistics may suggest one or the other. If it might be difficult for a person to come back for 2 vaccines, then clearly the Johnson & Johnson is better. I also should state that it is unclear in the Bay Area how much people will be able to choose or if they will be able to choose at all. So what do we know about all 3 vaccines? We know that they work very well. In other words, that their efficacy is very high and quite similar among older people, among men and women, among adults 16 years old and up. Across different races and ethnicities, the population of African Americans was around 15% in the mRNA vaccines, around 17% in Johnson & Johnson, many Latinos and others. We know that they work well among people with obesity, with high blood pressure, with diabetes, with HIV. We also know that they have side effects, but that these are usually well tolerated and limited to 1 to 2 days. It's important to note that as of now, over 60 million people have been vaccinated in the United States alone, and there have been no deaths linked to the vaccine. What don't we know? We don't know how well they prevent infection without symptoms. The data is very encouraging that if I'm vaccinated, I won't get what we call an asymptomatic infection. I'm less likely to get, not that I will not get, but much less likely to get an asymptomatic infection. And we know from data that is circulating, from data from Israel and data from the United Kingdom, that people seem to be less likely to transmit the virus if the vaccinated person is less likely to transmit the virus. It appears to lower that transmission somewhere between around 60 to 80%. Obviously, there can be additional rare immediate side effects, but with 60 million vaccinated, we're not seeing them. And pregnant women and breastfeeding women were excluded from the US trials, as is normally done in the United States. And so the vaccine is not formally authorized for use in pregnancy. That said, the American College of OBGYNs is recommending that women consider getting the vaccine and discuss that with their physician. We don't know whether these vaccines will work in children, and there are trials going on with both Moderna and Pfizer that we should have available by the end of this summer to know at least in the 9 to 16-year-old group. And then the million-dollar question, how long will this protection last? And will we need booster shots? And unfortunately, we don't know the answer to that yet either. It depends on how the coronavirus evolves over time. When counseling people on making a decision on the vaccine, what I and my fellow physicians take is an approach to not to think about the vaccine in isolation. One should compare one's fears of the vaccine, one's concerns about the side effects, to one's fears and concerns about the COVID-19 disease. As a reminder, many people, of course, get COVID-19 and have no symptoms or barely have symptoms. But I think none of us need a reminder that over 500,000 people have died in the United States alone from this terrible illness. So what's not changing right now? All of the precautions that we're all taking. But what has changed for those vaccinated is that it is okay for two people who are vaccinated, for example, to have a meal together, or a vaccinated couple to have a meal with another vaccinated couple who are also vaccinated. This is amazing. This is wonderful news. I have already taken advantage of this personally. Moreover, the CDC has issued guidance that if a person who is vaccinated can get together with those who are low risk and unvaccinated. And what this means is that grandparents can see their grandkids. And that, I don't need to tell you how important it is. Of course, people who are vaccinated should still use their masks and so on, because these vaccines are not 100%. They are highly effective. But as you saw, there were those 8 cases in the trial. And we are still recommending against unnecessary travel. I agree that stories and examples work best. This is me on a Saturday morning getting my vaccine from the chair of OBGYN who had volunteered to vaccinate. I was very happy. I had a sore arm the next day. I took some Tylenol. I was fine. When I got my second shot, it was a Wednesday. I went on Thursday. I saw patients. In the morning, I felt okay, but by afternoon, I wasn't feeling well. I was irritable, and I think my muscles hurt. I had dinner, went home, had dinner, and went to bed, and then felt fine the next day. A reminder that these vaccines are free to all patients. You may be asked about your insurance status, but no insurance is needed. And that these vaccines are for everyone. No one will be asked questions about their documentation status, and it is illegal to share information obtained via vaccination with ICE in the state of California. California is a sanctuary state, and no information will be shared. You also know that people in California can use My Turn to sign up and check their eligibility for the vaccine. And that concludes my regular talk that I have given many times to people about these vaccines. But just a reminder for this highly influential and important group of people. 500,000 deaths, it's hard to think and really understand what that number represents. There was an interesting article that said if we put those 500,000 people on buses and each bus carries 50 people, that bus caravan would stretch from Philadelphia to New York. Just that caravan of buses lined up, bus after bus after bus after bus. That's how many people it is. Moreover, we know that life expectancy has now dropped by 3 years for Latinos and about 2.5 years for African Americans as a consequence of this terrible disease. We know that in California, the cases for the Latino population way exceed this line, which is a proportion of people in the population. For Asians and for white Californians, case numbers are less than their proportion in the population. For African Americans, it's roughly about the same. And for Latinos, it way exceeds it. And unfortunately, for deaths, for Latinos, again, this has been a terrible, terrible disease, as it has been for African Americans and other groups throughout the country. We also know that it is poverty that marks this, and that when we look at the case rates, we see that the case rates are the highest among households that make the least amount of money. And we also know that when communities where many people live in crowded housing, that's where the case rate exceeds the statewide case rate. Finally, unfortunately, and very importantly for this discussion, the people who are most at risk tend to live in communities without health insurance and may be worried about access to the vaccine. Well, how well are we doing with vaccine equity? In California, in San Francisco, as you can see here on the right, we have been under-vaccinated Latinos and African Americans, under-vaccinating those two groups of people relevant to their percentage in the San Francisco population. And unfortunately, that is also true in Alameda County. So with that, let me stop sharing. And I would love, and Jonathan and I would love to hear your questions and your concerns. I hope that this has been useful to you.
Absolutely. And Dr. Butler, Reverend Dr. Butler, thank you for setting the table and for giving us as colleagues this very great opportunity to hear from Dr. Fernandez. Dr. Fernandez, your presentation was not only comprehensive, but you put a human touch to it too. And I think that speaks volumes. We are welcoming today, again, a person who wears a lot of hats, John McKnight, who is the Community Partners Group Coordinator for the COVID Command Center of the Department of Emergency Management. John, since almost the beginning of this pandemic, has been doing amazing work with outreach. He has been convening a faith-based roundtable, and he is out there in the community. So there are a lot of questions people are asking. And so what we've done is we're breaking with tradition a little bit today, and we're asking John to be our sole community panelist and to put a number of questions to you both. So without further ado, I would welcome John McKnight, Community Partners Group Coordinator for the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center of the Department of Emergency Management.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for the introduction. Dr. Butler, Dr. Fernandez, thank you for being with here today. I have to compliment you, Dr. Fernandez, on that presentation. I've been presenting on the virus and aspects, and your clarity, the simplicity of that was elegant. Thank you. That was excellent. I have to ask to steal your presentation from you. But with that said, some very good points brought up in there, and I want to come to it quickly. In a lot of the community conversations we have, concern, fear was even driven by what was supposed to be a inspiring statement. Operation Warp Speed. Operation Warp Speed was supposed to show that we were trying to get through this so quickly, but what it gave the impression of is that we rushed something that should have been paid attention to. I continuously hear from people that presented them with anxiety around the vaccine, and it creates a vision that this was not created over time. I know this to be different. Would you comment on the history of the development of these vaccines, why these were not created in such a short period of time, what the research behind it, and try to demystify or debunk this concept that these things were created in a rush?
Thank you so much for that question. It is a very important one. And of course, people are right to be skeptical. It takes years to create most vaccines. How could they create this in less than a year and test it? And is it really safe? Those of you who are as old as I am will remember that many, many years ago, there was another outbreak called SARS. And SARS also actually started in China and spread in many parts of the world, including to Canada. What's important about SARS is that it was caused by a coronavirus. And since SARS, which was 20 years ago, scientists have been working on creating a vaccine for a coronavirus. And they were almost finished with creating the SARS vaccine using this mRNA technology that underlies the Moderna and Pfizer, when along came SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. So that's why scientifically it was so relatively easy. They didn't start working on this vaccine de novo. There were almost 20 years of work on this vaccine with that. Similarly, the J&J vaccine takes advantage of a very well-established platform, the adenovirus platform, that has been used in other vaccines. But people can still say, okay, so they were working on it for a long time. Still, that was awfully fast. So why was it fast? One, the vaccines, the science was poised to be accomplished. But two, Operation Warp Speed guaranteed the pharmaceutical companies a market. The government, the US government said, we will pay for these vaccines, period. We will pay for them. Go ahead and start producing at the same time that they're being tested. So what wasn't changed was the science. The clinical studies that were conducted are the same clinical studies that were conducted for any vaccine. And the emergency authorization is simply a cutting of the red tape on the FDA side. But in fact, these vaccines have been subject to a lot of scrutiny because the companies were asked to make all their data public. They made all the data public, and many, many scientists, completely independent of either the government or the FDA, have examined the data.
And I'd like to add that just from a faith perspective, many faith leaders had been praying for God to intervene, that we could have something to stop the deaths, because I know that many of us experienced too many deaths in our own communities, and God intervened and through these vaccinations. And I think this is a testament not only to the science, which we should certainly respect and hold dear to us, but also a testament to God intervening on behalf of our prayers.
Thank you, Dr. Butler, and thank you, Dr. Fernandez, on that. You had talked earlier about the variants. Lots of questions about the variants. Certainly the Johnson & Johnson, which has been tested later in the process, was tested against the variants. Can you comment upon the efficacy as it's understood now for the Moderna and the Pfizer in regards to what's popping up? And are these variants going to change the way we live our lives?
I think that right now, fortunately, it looks like all three vaccines will work against the variants that are currently in circulation. The efficacy of Moderna and Pfizer is less than what was seen in the trials when examined against those other variants. That's why I think it's important not to draw head-to-head conclusions, but around which one is better, stronger. But they have been tested and they are less good against the new variants, but they still work. That's why many of us think it's a race a little bit, for a race to get the population vaccinated as fast as possible so that there will be less virus circulating, and it's a race against the virus mutating and causing new variants in the communities. I hope that's clear.
And just maybe to add just a little bit about what a variant is, just for folks that may not know, just viruses constantly change through mutation, and new variants of a virus are expected to occur over time. And sometimes new variants, they emerge and disappear, but then there are other times where their variants, they emerge and persist. And so multiple variants of the virus that causes COVID have been documented, I know, in the United States and globally during this pandemic. So these seem to spread more quickly than other variants, but it can lead to more cases, obviously. But an increase in the number of cases will put a lot of strain on the healthcare and resources and lead to hospitalizations. But I think to know that, you know, variants do occur as a consequence of viruses is important to know.
Earlier, you did cover the subject of side effects. I always get sick from vaccine shots. I was in the military. I've been shot up with more stuff than you can even begin to imagine, but I always get sick from these things. I know people have these similar reactions. How do we counter this? People are concerned. They hear that small percentage of people that get the severe allergic reactions, and they're weighing out taking the vaccine because of this. They're not lining up. They're hoping everyone will get it before them to see what happens. How do we assure people? Is it appropriate to assure people that these side effects are? How do we talk to them about this, please? Thank you.
Yes, such a wonderfully important question. I think that, you know, it's very understandable that people would be scared, anxious. I was anxious, you know, getting that shot. And I totally understand no one wanting to go first. So I think the most important point that one wants to make at this point is that no one is first. You're number 60 million and one, right? So 60 million people have gotten the vaccine. We know a lot about the vaccine side effects. The second point is that while it can be scary, we know a lot that the allergic reactions have all been readily treatable. They all happen right away. That's why if you have a history of allergy, you'll be asked when you go to the vaccine site if you have a history of allergies. And if you do, instead of being watched for 15 minutes, you'll be watched for a full 30 minutes. And that's how, meaning by watched, meaning you stay in that area, because these reactions happen right away. The other way to think about it is that it's a little bit like winning the lottery. 5 people out of every million is not something that is rare, is really rare. So it's winning the bad luck lottery. And then too, it tends to happen more in people who've had very severe allergic reactions in the past. What do we mean by very severe? That they needed to be hospitalized. Those are the people in whom we're seeing this.
And I've had the opportunity to take the shot as well. Actually wanted to be the first one. I wanted to take it as quickly as possible. But also, I think what was for me, the deciding factor was, I had some fatigue after the second shot. But certainly, as Alicia alluded to in her presentation, I'd rather have a few symptoms after taking the vaccination. And obviously they don't last long, versus actually getting COVID. And so I know many of the faith leaders have experienced folks in their churches and synagogues that have actually experienced COVID and know the consequences, the suffering, not only of the individual, but the family. And so that was certainly the deciding factor for me. And hopefully, that will sort of be, when faith leaders have the opportunity to take it, that should be the deciding factor for you too, is not being, having to suffer from the actual COVID virus itself.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think that I left out one important part, which is when counseling individuals, I think it's important to talk about their fears and give data, but I also think it's important to ask them about their motivations, right? Why did I get the vaccine? Well, obviously to protect myself and my patients, right? But really to be able to come home and not worry so much about whether I'm going to give COVID to my family, and also to a certain extent to participate for my community. Everyone's motivations will be different, but I think all of us want to be able to get together with family, and now we can.
Amen to that. Certainly, I know I feel better being out and about, knowing I've had my first shot. Can't wait for my second one Monday. The testing in these clinical trials, one of the questions that's come up sometimes by elder people, and I'm talking over 85.
Yes.
How much testing was done on my population during the clinical trials? And I would put an equitable lens on this. How much testing was done on other populations? Is there any data around that? Can we speak to that? I do know that 60 million people have been vaccinated. I understand that. But is there direct correlation or testing between the safety, particularly safety, based on age and ethnicity?
Yes, great question. As we get older, our immune system in general becomes less strong. That's one of the reasons that older people are much more vulnerable to this disease. As our immune system becomes less strong, we react less to the second shot. So in the trials, it was seen that younger people tended to have more reactions to the vaccinations than older people. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're older, you're not going to have a side effect, you're not going to have a reaction, you might sore arm, et cetera, but it's a little bit less likely than it is for a younger person who is being vaccinated. Similarly, so that's one thing. There is to my knowledge, I have not seen any data suggesting that there are any differences in side effect profiles by race or ethnicity. And obviously, we're all very similar, and I do not expect that there would be any. What we know is that it's effective in all of these race and ethnic groups, and no side effect differences.
Dr. Butler, any comment? Very good. Let's stay on this concept of an ethnic lens. We pointed out that very specific communities are more adversely affected by this disease, and more particularly by the morbidity. And we do know it's tragic to see how it's also a reflection of poverty. How do we increase the messaging in these communities, knowing that communities that are having some resistance to the vaccine are also the ones that are more likely to be dramatically affected by it? What can we do, and particularly as faith leaders, to get the information out to our communities and share with them a message of hope around what the vaccine offers to us?
Well, I hope that this conversation has provided you with some data to share with your congregants, to say that these is truly effective and safe, which they are. And I hope that that will help people encourage their congregations. I also hope that as you are all experts at counseling, and what I try to do again is always balance on one side natural anxieties with also natural hopes for a better outcome. And I always talk about it that way when I'm doing one-on-one counseling with my own patient. And then finally, I think that it is the lack of vaccine confidence in some communities is of course very understandable from a long history of issues. And what I hope is that by providing the information and by working with trusted messengers as our faith leaders, that we can really explain these things and have people make the decision that's right for them and that's also right for their families.
And I'll just add the importance, as I alluded to earlier, is just modeling our message. So practice what we preach, lead by example, what we do so well. And that, this is what we've been doing at Third Baptist, ensuring that we create messaging around the vaccine, testing every single day, be a site for testing, be a site for vaccinations. And really practicing what we preach, I think is certainly important.
Michael, I presume I have time for one more.
You do.
Okay, let me just.
And I'm going to ask a question.
Oh, I may have you do that. Let me add. Yesterday, I took the tour of the mass vaccination site. I can arrange for anybody on this call to get a tour of the mass vaccination site. Take it. It's profound. I thought I was going to see something simple that I was doing it out of kindness, sort of just to participate, and I was transformed. You have to see what they are doing here. If you've not been to the mass vaccination site, please take advantage of it and use all the leaders on this call. I hope you'll take advantage of it. Go through Michael, get a hold of me. Please, please, please come take this tour. It will open your eyes. Michael, why don't you go with your question, and then we'll see if I've still got time for my last one.
Moderator, how's that? Dr. Fernandez, Dr. Butler, I'm a dad, okay? And my son, freshman in college, went out of state, and in the first week, he and half the lacrosse team tested positive for COVID. Asymptomatic, worked his way through it. Apparently he has the antibodies. Is someone like him or somebody who is tested positive and is actively COVID, are they eligible for the vaccine as well?
Great question. Yes, surprisingly, we are recommending it. And the reason is, and the reason I say surprisingly is that I thought that natural immunity would be better than vaccine immunity. And it turns out that it's not true. It's the other way around. The vaccine actually appears to give longer lasting immunity and create a sort of broader number of antibodies that might work well against the new variants. So we are recommending that people who've had COVID get vaccinated. We tell people wait 3 months so that first shot, you'll already have seen the vaccine, you'll have a reaction, so that first shot doesn't cause, doesn't give you a lot of side effects. But you can get the COVID vaccine, and moreover, you should get the COVID vaccine.
Thank you.
And Michael, I've spoken to a lot of dads who have kids with concerns of taking the vaccine, and thank God for Johnson & Johnson, because this may be our opportunity at one and done for young people to be able to take it, and certainly it's effective, but it's efficient in terms of just being able to take it once.
Exactly. And my daughter has not been vaccinated. She's a college student. And I am hopeful that they will all get Johnson & Johnson, that they'll sort of line them up in the gym and go ahead and give it to them. And I can't wait for that to happen so that I feel will feel less worried. And while we're there, I just want to say that the point that John McKnight made about seeing the sites, that is a great idea. And also that the Department of Public Health is starting transportation for folks who need help getting to these sites. So for congregations where people may not have access to cars and want to go over either to the Moscone site or to the City College Ocean Avenue site, which is car-based, there will be transportation.
John, before you go, I just want to say your imagery, Dr. Fernandez, of lining everybody up reminds me, and I'm dating myself by saying this, I remember being in elementary school getting the rubella vaccine.
That's right.
We're in the gymnasium and boom, 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 right down the line, and we were grateful for it.
Yeah, exactly.
John, you want to pick up?
I will, thank you. And with just a few minutes left, I want to look forward. We know that we're getting the vaccine. This is an amazing new vaccine. I'm reading all about it, and I'm continuing to be amazed at the change in medicine. I could talk ad nauseum about this, but I mean, to close this with to say, what's the future of the world going to look like? With this new virus existing in our community, knowing that this is going to provide immunity, it's going to be a life-saving immunity, but the growth of variants, the future of corona in our communities, and the precautions we need to take, what do you think our world will look like for the next generation?
Thank you for that question. It allows me to say something that I suspect the Aman will agree with me, but for those of us with roots in other parts of the world, we know how important it is to recognize that this is a global pandemic and that it needs to be addressed globally. And right now, one of the things that we're all very aware of is that not only are there differences in population within the rich countries, but the biggest difference is between access to the vaccine of the rich countries compared to lower and middle income, poorer countries. And so for those of us with roots, so first there's the human issue that vaccine needs to be available. But second, as you point out, there is a huge public health issue. If the entire planet is not vaccinated, then the virus will continue to circulate. It will mutate because viruses always mutate, as Jonathan pointed out. That's what they do. And then we can get once again a very dangerous variants that our vaccines may not work against. So there's a public health need to vaccinate the entire world as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And I hope that that those of us who are immigrants, but those of us who are not immigrants, also support a global vaccination campaign.
Thank you for saying that. Oh, Dr. Butler, please.
No, I just wanted to add, just as a addition to that, is that there's still a need for folks to get fed. There's still folks that are unemployed. There's still folks that are dying from heart disease. There's still folks that are suffering from diabetes. There are many other health conditions that people face on a day-to-day basis prior to pandemic, and it's going to happen after the pandemic. And I think, as you all know, as faith leaders, that there is certainly has been a need for us to kind of step it up, come together, and not only take care of the physical needs of our parishioners, but also obviously the mental health of our parishioners as well. And so I just wanted to put that out there, the importance. It's still a need for our communities outside of the pandemic. Also, although we certainly want to focus on the pandemic, but there are other things that our parishioners need as well.
Thank you for stating that. I really believe that we are going to have the great challenge of navigating people back to connectivity and back to whole health. And so thank you, Reverend Dr. Butler. And my heart was warmed last night. You know, I have this standing dinner date with Rachel Maddow. She speaks and I cook. But last night she was mentioning that, she showed a clip of the president's just about stepping off the stage, and somebody asked, well, what happens if we have a surplus? And he said, well, after we take care of our own, he said, we're going to help make the world a better place and get the world inoculated, because unless we do that, we will have lost. And so I really appreciate you raising that. That was very heartwarming. I'm going to do something I haven't done in the past as well. You know, by day's end, the recording link to this program will be disseminated to our 5,000 e-subscribers. Those of you who are on the call, I would ask you to share this with your communities, because I really think that what was said today needs to get out and get out quickly. And if you can post it on your social media sites, if you can talk to the clergy that might not be on this line from your communities, I think that this might be a resource that they sorely need. And so I would ask that you do that. I want to thank both of you, Dr. Butler and Dr. Fernandez. I want to thank Kaushik and dear Iftikhar, and of course, John McKnight. Also want to say thank you to Cynthia Zambucas, who is the administrative and associate for the San Francisco Interfaith Council Program Associate, whom Kaushik mentioned earlier, and to our wonderful team at the COVID Command Center, Trey Russell Allen, Alyssa Karawali, Sharon Walton, and Hafisa Salabai for their continuous support with this platform. We hope you'll all join us next week at this same time, when we're going to take up a very critical, timely, and sensitive issue, and that is the racial attacks on San Francisco's Asian community. We will have with us the co-director of Chinese for Affirmative Action, and a number of others from other communities who have experienced racial tension as well. It's time to address this issue. It is at the heart of the San Francisco Interfaith Council's concern at this point, as Kaushik will reaffirm and confirm. So we hope that you'll join us next week. That concludes our program today. Thank you all, those of you who presented and those of you who joined us online.
Thank you, Dr. Fernandez, Dr. Butler. Thank you very much.